welcome to Series 2, Episode 3 of In Suspense, a podcast or vodcast for fans and writers of crime fiction. I'm Laura North and my co-host is the very lovely Leslie Cara.
Thank you.
In our last episode, we chatted to British former snowboarder Ali Reynolds about her debut novel Shiver and had a really fascinating conversation about research versus writing what you know. And it was just, I found that really interesting. And I think also hearing her comments about the ruthlessness and single-mindedness of these sports people in these competitive environments really interesting. I think she's definitely cornered the market on these sports themed thrillers. So I think we both can't wait to see what she writes next, can we?
Absolutely, no. And I think her next novel is set, I think she said it's set on a surfing beach in Australia. So very different from the snowy mountain lodge in the French Alps. A real change in setting and temperature. And setting is in fact our topic for today. Gosh, Laurie, did you see how seamlessly I made that transition from...
Went straight in there, didn't you?
I know. It makes a change from last week when I was faffing about, didn't know me arse from my elbow last week. So
I didn't notice. I'm probably the same.
Oh dear, no. But on to setting. I've been really looking forward to talking about this because I think setting is so important in fiction. It plays such a big role, doesn't it? And it can really add to the atmosphere and tension of a novel. And I mean, in our genre, the one that we write in, psychological suspense, psychological thriller, whatever you prefer to call it, where pace is so important and, you don't really want to get too bogged down in describing a place. However, if you can create a sense of place, I think it really does add something. You've only got to think of Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, which many people think of, don't they, as the prototype of the psychological thriller. And the setting there, the fictional setting of Mandalay, the old Gothic house and the fog and the jagged coastline, all of those things, they really add to that sense of foreboding, don't they? And I don't think the novel would work half as well without that setting. Really.
No, absolutely not. And when we were thinking about this episode as a topic for setting, there was a few books that really sprung to mind for me, and obviously Rebecca being one of them, as you say, that quintessential psychological suspense. But also, what else sprung to mind for me? Susie Lyne's Valentina, which I think we've both read. We've got that isolated cottage in Scotland.
Yeah.
And then another one was Lake Child by Isabel Ashdown, if you can see that. Where it's set in this really wild, unpredictable landscape, and that really is woven into the storyline. Some great examples, but
they're both really good settings in those books. And just you mentioned Susie Lynes there. I was just saying what a week she's had. She's whizzed up to number one, hasn't she? In the so congratulations.
Yes. But it's not just isolated settings that make sorry, I've got to mention on the subject of isolated settings, I'm reading at the moment The Sanatorium by Sarah Pearse, where I am just loving the setting of this isolated hotel. And I don't think I've ever read a book where the actual setting feels so much like a character in itself, and I don't know yet if I trust it. So I'm really enjoying that one. Talking of settings, but it's not just isolated settings. It's toxic work environments can work really well. And my favourite is the school gates, because obviously it means so much to me, that cliquey friendship groups in the school. I just absolutely love. And Zoe Lee's The Secretary is a great example of that. But as is yours, which has got both the school gates and in the rumour, you've got the school gates and this coastal setting as well. We're really against the elements there, which is fantastic in your first two books, wasn't it?
Yes, I suppose it was inevitable really that I'd choose a coastal setting for my first book and my second. Well, actually my second I wrote first because I'd just moved to the coast from London, and I'd spent most of my adult life in London. And so it was such a culture shock coming to this very small town. And I think I was a little bit low when I first moved here because my husband was still working in London in the week and just coming back at the weekend. And I used to walk such a lot along the coast, thinking about my writing and what I was going to do. And so it was inevitable, I think, that setting crept in, and it worked really well for, a roomer in a small town.
Mm.
And yeah, I really, I really sort of enjoyed that. And I think the book I'm writing now, book 4, and also book 3, The Dare, which is coming out soon, they're both set very much in London, in southeast London, and I'm really enjoying that change of location and having that distance between me and London now. Having not lived there for 4 or 5 years, I find it's fascinating to get back into that sort of location. Yeah, so I enjoy setting. I think it's an integral part of my writing anyway. I remember recently. No, it wasn't actually that recently. It was a few years ago now. It was when I first moved to Frinton, and I went to a book event at our local bookshop, Caxton's Bookshop, great bookshop, lovely independent bookstore, and there was an event with Sharon Bolton. And I love Sharon Bolton's writing. In fact, I'm reading one of her proofs at the moment, The Pact. Talk about that later. And she was talking about her book Little Black Lies. I don't know whether you've read that one.
I've not read it, no.
It's set in the Falkland Islands, and she rendered the setting so brilliantly, I thought, and I was absolutely amazed when I discovered through this Q&A with her that she had never visited the Falklands.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, that's amazing. But I suppose with Google Earth and all the different YouTube videos and resources we've got on the internet, you don't have to necessarily have lived somewhere to render a setting authentically, although it does help.
It does help, yeah. I think because my current book that I'm writing is also set in London, having set them in sort of the village life quite a lot. I like you have wanted a change, and I've set it in East London, which is where I used to live, and it's interesting remembering the layout of the streets and the type of markets that were there. And I think there's lots of little things that do help if you have seen it. I think there's so much you can be gained from YouTube, but I do think there's a flavour to something you can certainly get if you've been.
Definitely. I mean, talking of book events, I was talking about that Sharon Bolton event. I am so missing book events. I bet everybody is at the moment, but oh my God, I just feel how we seem to be missing the thing that we enjoy. I mean, the writing's the most important thing, isn't it? And that's what sort of motivates us all. But that sort of getting out and meeting people and going to events we all thought we'd be back to normal this year, didn't we?
I know, I think that makes it much harder, doesn't it? Because last year we all told ourselves, oh, it'll just be 2020. And now it's almost this year's here and it's not looking any better at all. And you're almost writing this year off. And yeah, on my Facebook time hop the other day, there's a photo I shared of the two of us at your book launch for Who Did You Tell? And that was a whole year ago in January, wasn't it? And that was before we knew anything was going to happen, and it does make me miss them. I'm certainly not holding out any hope for this year's events at the moment, but it's amazing how your expectations change, because just be able to go meet a couple of authors for a coffee and a chat would just make such a difference, wouldn't it? Like not even a big event now, just anything would be nice. But then I suppose on the plus side, you have got this massive uprising of online events, which are certainly more accessible to everybody. There's loads of literary festivals that have now moved online. I'm chairing a panel tonight at the Stay at Home Literary Festival crime panel with 3 fantastic authors, and that's free to attend. So you don't have to even put anything but your pajamas on. I mean, I won't be wearing my pajamas, not on the top half anyway.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so that is one of the plus side, isn't it? That we have, I think, in the last second half of the lockdown, we all sort of rallied and managed to get ourselves online a bit more.
Yes. So tell us how we can access this event tonight, Laurie.
Oh, well, I'll have to put a link on the YouTube, but if you just Google Stay at Home Literary Festival, you'll see the event pop up. So it's tonight's crime panel at 7 p.m. It's live, so I hopefully won't make any mistakes.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. I'm really looking forward to hearing that. Are you allowed to tell us who the other crime authors are, or is that top secret?
No, not secret. No, it's all on the internet. So you've got Karen Rose, who's a really big American crime author. You've got James Oswald, who's a Scottish crime author, and Stella Oni as well, who's a debut last year. So 3 very different authors, but they've all written their latest books are on the topics of revenge and rituals. So that's what we're focusing on for the panel. So
oh, well, revenge must be having a moment at the moment. A moment at the moment. I'm on a revenge panel, I think, in at the end of February. Granite Noir. I think it's called Vengeful Hearts.
Oh, fantastic.
So that should be good. I'll have to get the details of that. Talk about that in a later episode. But it's revenge is definitely a common theme, isn't it, in psychological suspense. But, you mentioned that photo of us that you posted on Facebook. That made me really, well, it was very nostalgic looking at that, wasn't it? It seemed such a long while ago.
Yeah.
And we were so happy, our little faces. We really didn't know what was coming, did we?
No, but we didn't know that we'd be doing this either.
No, that's true. There have been lots and lots of positive things.
Yeah.
And actually, the writer who interviewed me on that night of the launch of Who Did You Tell, Jack Jordan, he's actually going to come on the show, isn't he, in a few weeks' time? So that should be. And I think he's going to be talking to us about agents, isn't he? So that's going to be,
and changing agents,
changing agents. That's going to be a really interesting episode. But yes, so we started this vodcast really to cheer ourselves up. So we mustn't be too gloomy because, as you rightly said, there've been. Although it's been sad and we're missing lots of things, there have been many, many positive things as well. I was reading something somebody said the other day about, so many people can now attend events that couldn't have done before. People who maybe had disability or couldn't afford to get to, and couldn't travel on public transport or what have you, or couldn't for any reason, afford to maybe go to one of these events. They're all available now from the comfort of your own home. So it's widened it up to a bigger audience, I think.
Yeah, and it will be interesting to see when the world returns to normal, if there still will be an online element. Will panels which are live and with people visiting, will they stream them as well for at certain periods of time so people online can view as well? So have we changed forever with how we're going to do things? I
think we have. Obviously, real life events will happen again at some point. Yes, of course they will. But I think the online streaming of events will continue. I think it's been successful, and I can't see that stopping. I really can't. But we do need to get together at some point whenever we can, and we'll plan the mother of all book parties, won't we, in 2020? Yeah. I think we should go somewhere, hot and exotic, maybe. We deserve it, don't we? Especially looking at the weather today. It's so. I know. Maybe somewhere like the Caribbean or Hawaii or India.
Perfect setting, yeah. Oh, lovely.
India brings us on to our guest for this week.
Check you out with your segues today, Leslie.
I know. I don't know what Rashid put on my porridge this morning, but I'm segueing all over the place. So yes, our guest for this week is actually coming to us live from India, and it is Trisha Sakhlecha.
Hello and welcome, Trisha Sakhlecha, to In Suspense. Trisha, it's so great to have you on the show with us. So I'm going to start by giving a little bio for our listeners and viewers. So Trisha grew up in New Delhi and now lives in London. Trisha has worked as a designer, a trend forecaster and a lecturer. She is a graduate of the acclaimed Faber Academy writing course, and her debut thriller was called Your Truth or Mine, and was about the unraveling of a marriage and the dark secrets couples keep from one another. Her second novel is out today, and it's called Can You See Me Now, which I was incredibly fortunate to have an advanced copy of. So thank you. And I said in my last episode of this how much I was enjoying it, and it really had my heart racing towards the end. So would you start, Trisha, please, by telling us a little bit about Can You See Me Now?
Absolutely. First of all, let me just say thank you for having me. I love the podcast, so I'm really, really excited to be here. So Can You See Me Now is a book about, it's a book about teenage friendship and power and privilege. And it kind of starts off with the protagonist, Alia, who moves to India from London at the age of 16. And she's drawn into this like really intense, toxic, claustrophobic teenage friendship with the two most popular girls at school, Noor and Sabah, who also happen to be much, much more privileged, much more well off than she is. And it's about that sense of the haves and the have-nots, especially in a high school, and how Alia is drawn into this friendship that's full of really dark secrets. There's a lot of resentment and warring loyalties. And of course, because they're teenagers, it's all played out like life and death. And then 15 years later, so something happens while they're at high school. At the end of the year, there's this big tragedy. And then 15 years later, Alia's a minister in the Indian cabinet. And it's about what happened, what was that secret, what was the scandal, and is it going to come back to haunt her?
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. Well, as you know, Trisha, I absolutely loved this book. And I particularly liked the fact that it's set in Delhi, because you evoke that setting so beautifully and so well. And it's so different from most of the other psychological thrillers out there, having that setting. And Laurie and I were talking earlier in the show about how integral setting is to a novel and how it adds to the atmosphere. And Can You See Me Now is incredibly atmospheric. And so I was wondering, what comes first for you, setting or plot?
I think that's such an interesting question, but I don't think I can think of either in isolation. For me, the setting has to be a part of the plot, and it's very much a character in the novel. Because I think everything that happens in the outside world has to reflect in the characters in our lives, and therefore it must impact the plot. Otherwise, it kind of becomes redundant, and you can't really amp up the suspense without that sort of reflection happening, without the back and forth between the outside and the inside. So, for instance, like with Can You See Me Now, the modern day timeline is contemporary India. It's set in a political world with the elections looming. And we're seeing Alia as a young cabinet minister in a very patriarchal society, a very conservative system of governance, lots of religious intolerance, sexism, nepotism, all of that. And all of that has to have an impact on Alia and how she behaves. That's just how she is as a character and as a person. And then when you have little incidents happening within the setting or within the outside world, like in the novel, there's a case early on that Alia hears of in the news. It's a gang rape of a young girl. It's about which politician is going to take a stand or not. And as it often happens in India, it's very heavily politicized. So that drives a lot of Alia's decisions. So it drives the plot. So it kind of melds together into one for me, I think.
Oh,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent answer. Another thing I really admire about your writing, Trisha, is that you're not afraid to shy away from some of the more challenging aspects of Indian life. As you've just said, you deal with things like religious and political extremism and rape culture and all those very difficult subjects. And I was wondering, what was the germ for this novel? Was there something very specific that prompted you to write it?
Yes, there was actually. So when I was still in high school in New Delhi, so this is back in like early 2000s, there was a scandal that happened at my high school. It was a sex scandal. It was the first social media sex scandal that India had, and it was set in a high school where two teenagers from my school took a video of themselves engaging in oral sex, and then that video went viral. It ended up going on an auction site, and like before the idea of viral even existed, it was all anyone could talk about. The boy's face was seen, the girl's face, the boy's face wasn't seen. He shot the video, but the girl's face was seen. And what that did was it created this huge conversation in India, where traditionally the view is that Indian girls are they're quite prim, they're quite proper, they don't really have boyfriends, they don't have sex lives. And suddenly all anyone could talk about was what these two teenagers were up to. And there was like this fear that kind of gripped the nation. And all anyone wanted to do was keep the girls safe by controlling them. There was the most, like, honestly, the rules that came into force. So this was a couple of years after I graduated high school, but I still remember hearing my friends and my juniors tell me that, oh, we aren't allowed to take mobile phones to school anymore. We aren't allowed to speak to boys outside of class. We aren't allowed, there's a mandated skirt length now. You can't wear a short skirt and go to school. It was the most ridiculous things. Because no one wanted to actually accept that teenagers have lives of their own. But more importantly, I think like the thing that really affected me as a teenager was seeing this this teenage girl who was basically persecuted. She had to, we never knew for sure, but what was being said in school and in the community was that she had to leave the country with her whole family, because though her name was never mentioned, I mean, you can't really keep a teenager's name out of a high school scandal. Everyone knew who she was, and her entire family had to flee. Whereas the boy just went to a different, just as exclusive high school, and carried on as normal. And it was just this horrible sense of injustice that stayed with me. I couldn't quite forget that. And then when I started thinking about my second novel, that was when Me Too was happening. That was when we were seeing loads and loads of reports about the increasingly brutal rapes in India that were happening, all of that. And I knew I had to do something with the two of them together. It just felt very, very obvious to go there.
Oh, and you certainly do that really well, with that injustice happening through both storylines. When I was reading it, it felt to me like you've got the past chapters with the teenage girls, and then the present chapters with Sabat and Alia as the junior minister. You had such a fantastic job of, every time I finished a chapter from one timeline, I wanted to carry on with that chapter and find out what was happening, but then you threw me back into the other storyline. And I wondered, actually, when I was reading it, how much plotting that must have taken for you. Did you have to take a long time plotting, or did it happen quite naturally? Can you talk us through how you did it?
I'm so happy to hear you say that, Laurie, because I really admire the plotting in your novels, and to have you say that you found both timelines compelling. Like, that was the thing that I struggled with the most. It didn't actually happen until the very, very final stages, and I don't think it was as straightforward as I would have liked it to be. Even with the plotting, I tend to plot quite a lot before I write. So I thought, oh, this is going to be nice and simple. I've got my plot laid out. I'm just going to do these wonderful alternate chapters, and it just wouldn't work. It took a lot of back and forth. And with the first draft, eventually I kind of had to accept that I might have to write both storylines. I was still writing them alternately, but I had to let go. One thing I had to do was I had to let go of the idea of writing alternate chapters, because that just wasn't working. And then I thought, okay, let me just get the story down, and then I'll come back and worry about the interweaving. So it was very, very layered. It took lots of goes at the draft to kind of get that right, because I wanted both timelines to be equally compelling. But I also wanted to establish that direct correlation between what happens in one timeline and what happens in the next. So, because I think as writers of psychological suspense, essentially what we're doing is we're playing with the reader's perceptions, and we're kind of trying to get into the heads and go, okay, this is what I want you to think now. So ultimately, I ended up creating this beast of a spreadsheet, which had it had all the highs and lows in the novels, every scene, everything I wanted them to think. This happened at like final draft stage, by the way, not in the first draft. I couldn't have done it then. But like things like tension scale, who's the suspect, all of that went into this spreadsheet that my agent got a very, very brief glimpse of because she was curious. And I think it scared her a little bit.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Yeah, it never gets any easier, does it? And the plotting aspect, that sounds amazing. Having a great big spreadsheet like that. Yeah, it's. But I think you're right. You that kind of in-depth planning often can only happen when you've done the first draft, can't it? Because
Yes, absolutely. And I think with this one, because when you're doing the dual timelines, you want both timelines to be equally compelling, and you want those cliffhangers at the end of each chapter, but you can't do that until you've done the character development and established all the stakes and figured that out so that you can then start to interweave them together.
yeah. Can I take you back just to setting for a moment? Now, Can You See Me Now is set mainly in India, but it does have some scenes in the UK as well. And in your previous novel, your debut novel, Your Truth or Mine, which I also loved, that also spans several continents, doesn't it? And I was wondering, for example, is your next novel going to also span continents? Is that something you deliberately set out to do, or do you think that's inevitable because you actually have a foot in both cultures as well? I was just wondering about that.
I think that's just what I was going to say, that it's the way I live. I live across 2 continents and I'm constantly going back and forth. So to be able, that's all I can write. Well, at the moment, that's all I can write. That's what feels easiest and comes naturally, having that Indianness, but living in London. So my second novel is a more closed setting. It's set all entirely in Scotland. But it's an Indian cast of characters, and it's an Indian cast of characters who are in Scotland on holiday, but they live in Delhi. So that interplay between the 2 cultures and between the 2 ways of living is definitely still there. But I mean, I don't know if it's just that everything else about writing a novel can sometimes be so difficult that it's easier to go back to the familiar and to set it in a world or in a sort of space that because I know, like Leslie, you did that with your novels as well. You do that with your novels as well, don't you? With the setting being inspired from your own hometown.
Yes. Although I was saying earlier to Laurie, with the Dare and the next one, they're both set in southeast London. So I think yes, I didn't want to become known as the writer who always sets her novel in a small seaside town. But yeah, I think you're right. You write kind of what you know, and you try to expand and extend yourself in different directions. But there's that familiar sense of knowing that it infiltrates your writing, isn't it? Yeah, or doesn't it? Rather, I can't speak English today.
We won't hold it against you, Leslie. And I think, as Leslie said, I haven't ever read a book, a psychological thriller that's set across the 2 continents and is so immersed in the culture of India and with the girls and their culture. And it really stood out for me, having both this fantastic plot and also a very different setting. And I wondered what advice you would give to anybody on setting and how you would. Yeah, I suppose what advice I've got your bag, Leslie. Can't get my question out. So what advice would you give for choosing a setting for a novel? Is what I'm trying to ask.
What advice would I think the way I pick a setting, I was thinking about this earlier this week because I was revisiting the setting of my 3rd novel and going, should I move it? So it's at the minute, it's set on an island in Scotland, and I was on a little writing break in the middle of an Indian jungle, and I was like, maybe I should just move it here. It'll be so much easier. There's no way I'm going to be able to go to Scotland to do any research anytime soon. But what made me finally decide to stick with Scotland was the effect that I wanted to create. And I think that would be my advice, like pick a setting that ties in with the theme and the effect you want to create and how you want the reader to feel, because the setting, especially in psychological thrillers and crime, plays such a huge role in sort of getting those hearts racing and having the little sounds and noises and smells filter through. So with Can You See Me Now, I wanted to write something that would expose readers to that same kind of sense of injustice and unease and outrage that I felt as a teenager, and that I still feel every time I watch coverage of what's going on with women's rights in India. Mm. So it obviously had to be set in India. It had to have the dual timeline, and it had to be in a political world. So I guess that's a very long way of saying pick something that ties in with the theme and the effect you want to create.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
No, I think that's a really good answer. Yes, I think everything in a sense has to fit in with the theme of your novel, doesn't it? The setting, the character, the plot, it all feeds in. In fact, that's one of the ways I plan. I always try and think of the theme of the novel, and I do a sort of diagram with the theme in the middle and then all the different narrative threads going off that, like a big spidergram sort of thing. And that's how I do it. But yeah, no, that's a really good answer. What are you reading at the moment, Trisha? What's because you can't come home to London at the moment, can you? Do you want to tell everyone what's happened?
Well, so I was due to fly back 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I couldn't. And since then, I've tried multiple times. My flight's been cancelled 3 times, and now I've just given up. I'm going to come back when the airline gods are on my side again, because apparently it's gone from something like 50 flights a week from India to 50 or 60 flights a week from India to London to just 12, and it's potluck. So I'm stuck here, which means I'm doing a lot of reading.
Well, it looks quite... I saw your Facebook post the other day. It looks rather a nice place to be stuck, actually. And I'm rather envious because London and the southeast is pretty grim and wet and miserable at the moment. So I think I'd much rather be there. And of course, if you flow back, you've got to be in quarantine for 2 weeks anyway, haven't you? So
exactly. And at the minute, like I'm in my 3rd home, I think. I think that's the right way of putting it. And I'm with family. I've got a lovely new niece who thinks I am the absolute best human on earth. So I'm very, very happy where I am. And I'll come back when I need to come back. I think that's the joy of living in these times.
Yes.
You do see what's most important. And also, like, there's nothing that as writers, we can work pretty much anywhere, can't we?
That's exactly it. That's it's a great occupation for you. You can be anywhere, as you say, and speak to someone on the other side of the world. It's amazing, really. It's like magic, isn't it? But you were going to tell us what you were reading at the moment.
Sure.
If you have any spare time to read, I am
reading a lot. This is what I'm reading at the minute. Well, I've just finished it. Leave the World Behind by Ramon Alam, I think that's how you pronounce his name. And I thought it was absolutely incredible. It's a literary thriller set, it's set a few hours from New York. I think it's upstate New York. And it's about this family of 4 who go off for this off-grid holiday, and they've got an Airbnb. They get there, and I think it's the night of their arrival that the owners turn up unannounced. And they say, well, and of course it's an Airbnb, so you've never actually seen the owners or met them. You've only dealt with them on email. So this couple claiming to be the owners turn up, and they say, well, something's happened in New York. There's been some kind of a storm, and we didn't want to risk going back to our apartment. So can we stay here with you? And of course, it's a white family. It's a Black couple who seem to own. So there's lots about race. There's all sorts of questions about would you trust them? Would you not? If you do trust them, if you don't trust them, is it because of prejudice, or are you just being cautious? But eventually, I mean, this happens early on, so I'm not giving anything away. Eventually, they do decide to let them stay because it's an older couple. And then as the novel progresses, there's this growing sense of unease because something really bad's happened. They have no access to the news, the electricity goes, there's a herd of like 400 or 500 deer that have suddenly started walking towards the house or the cottage that they're in, and they cannot get any information. And then they start seeing all of these weird things happen to them. There's a noise that starts off. It is so unsettling.
You've made the hairs go up on the back of my neck.
You will love it. It's probably one of the best books. If I'd read it last year, I would have said it's one of the best books I'd read last year. But let's
say the title again, Trisha. Say the title again.
Leave the World Behind.
Leave the World Behind. That's one to look out for. That sounds amazing.
Yes, and also it ties in really well with the theme of this episode, setting, because the setting and the world plays such a huge role.
Yes. And what about
you? Are you reading something?
Am I? Well, I am. I'm just finishing off the latest Erin Kelly, which I talked about last week. Watch Her Fall. I'm really enjoying that, and I've been sent 2 more proofs. This is The Pact. Hang on, let's get that right. The Pact by Sharon Bolton. We mentioned her earlier in the show. Actually, I was talking about a previous novel of hers, Little Black Lies, which was set in the Falklands. I haven't started this, but it sounds great. That summer they made a deadly promise, her life for theirs. 20 years later, it's payback time. A golden summer and 6 talented friends are looking forward to the brightest of futures until a daredevil game goes horribly wrong and a woman and 2 children are killed. 18-year-old Megan takes the blame, leaving the others free to get on with their lives. In return, they each agree to a favour payable on her release from prison. 2 decades later, she's back. Let the games begin.
Incredible.
And I've also been sent another book called Payday, which I haven't started yet. That's by Celia Walden. And that's, they decide to take, revenge themes are pretty big at the moment, aren't they? They decide to take justice into their own hands, but they're about to discover that justice is far from clear-cut. Revenge is about to get messy and might just cost them everything. So, yeah, Payday. So that'll keep me busy. What about you, Laurie?
Oh, so I was sent the latest James Oswald, What Will Burn, which is a really gritty Scottish-based crime novel, which I really enjoyed, about revenge and rituals, as well as a bit of witchcraft going on, which is a bit different for me to read. And I'm also reading, as I said earlier, The Sanatorium by Sarah Pearse, which is a fantastic example of setting as well. So yeah, a couple of really good ones there.
Excellent. And you're doing the panel with James Oswald, aren't you?
Yes, that's why I was sent the book. So
yes, fantastic. You know, earlier you said it was tonight. Do you mean tonight, the day this episode goes live?
Tonight, it's in the day because it's Thursday.
Because we're actually recording this on Tuesday, but so the panel event that you're doing is on Thursday. Yeah, okay, yes. Great. Right, now, Trisha, we've come to what we call the fun part of the show. Whether it is fun or not is up to you to decide. Right, let me see what we do. Yeah, so we don't want to give anything away, but in Can You See Me Now, there were moments when those 3 teenage girls and what went on at the school really got under my skin and brought back some sort of uncomfortable memories. And so we were wondering, what is the most embarrassing or awkward situation that you can remember from your school days?
Oh, there's far too many. There's far too many to name. But luckily, I had a group of friends who were nothing like Noor and Sabah and Alia. So we always had each other's back, even though we ended up doing some pretty silly things together. But yeah, I think it was just a lot of pranks, pulling a lot of pranks on each other and embarrassing each other that way, but nothing, it was all harmless fun, so I don't think there's anything as interesting from my own school days as there is in the novel. So I don't think I've got a good enough answer to that, I'm afraid.
That's probably quite a relief, isn't it? Because you wouldn't want to endure some of that. What about you, Laurie? Have you got anything you can particularly remember?
Well, I'm pretty sure I've blocked a lot of it out, but one thing that really sticks in my mind when I think of my high school days is that I got a nickname during my PE lessons, because I used to change. You know what it's like, all the girls get into the changing rooms and they change for PE together, and I got the nickname Laurie Longtoes because my apparently my toes are quite long, and I think they're just normal. I've got big feet to help me balance, I would say, and I'm tall. But yeah, that stuck, unfortunately. So that was probably my embarrassing high school memory, I would say. Don't want that to become a Twitter handle, just so you know.
No, Laurie Longtoes. Well, Laurie Longtoes. It's quite alliterative, isn't it? My school days, I think they were just one long embarrassment, really, from start to finish. No, I mean, like you said, Trisha, I had a sort of a small group of core friends so I was lucky in that respect. I was bullied at one point, but it wasn't sort of the horrendous bullying, because as I say, always had my own friends sort of who were looking out for me. But I was bullied by a nasty group of girls whose names shall not be mentioned.
Not unless you're writing them in a book.
No, I may put them in a book, yeah. But I think what used to embarrass me the most is I'm hopeless at sport and PE. I always have been. My hand-eye coordination is dreadful. The only thing I'm any good at, really, and I'm not that good at that, is swimming and walking. But I remember sort of, those days when you're having to wait and be picked for netball teams or hockey teams, and it would always be, oh no, not Leslie, we had her last week, it's your turn to have her on your team. So I used to be very embarrassed about my lack of sporting ability. So yeah, that's about it, really. That's the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to me.
I thought they were quite good ones. We've not had too much embarrassments then, have we? Yeah. So we're on to the quick fire round now, Trisha. So I'm going to fire away with some quick questions, and you just got to say the first thing that comes to your head. Okay. All right. Tea or coffee?
Coffee in London, masala chai in India.
Ooh. Paperback or Kindle?
Paperback.
Laptop or notebook and pen?
Laptop.
Savory or sweet?
Sweet.
Cat or dog?
Cat.
Countryside or city?
Can I have both? I want both.
Yes, go for it. Would you rather be somewhere hot or cold?
Cold.
And the final one, which I feel a bit mean about asking this, fashion or books?
Books about fashion.
I like that.
That's a great answer.
Well, that's the end of our show now. So thank you very much, Trisha, for being a guest today. We've really enjoyed talking to you about setting, and wish you enormous success with Can You See Me Now, which is out today and is currently 99p in the Kindle monthly deal, I believe. So do snap that bargain up. Over the coming weeks, Leslie and I are going to try and up our Instagram game and post some photos of some of the books we get sent rather than just our faces. So watch out for that one. And we would like to say a quick shout out to Rhiannon for her topic suggestion. She commented on our channel on YouTube. So we do read all the comments, and we're really grateful for all of them. So thank you. So this is usually the point where we leave you in suspense about our next guest, but we've decided to change things up a bit, and we're going to actually tell you. So on our next show, we will be interviewing Sarah Pearce, the author of The Sanatorium, about a fresh take on a classic thriller concept. So obviously I'm reading the book at the moment, so I can't wait to chat to her next week, which just leaves us now time to say thank you very much for watching In Suspense.
In Suspense.
Right, the timing was dreadful at that. Let's try that one again. Thank you very much for watching
In Suspense. Oh, Trisha, what are we like? Thank you so much for coming on. We've loved having you on.
It's been wonderful. Thank
you. This was such a fun chat.
Okay, so Can You See Me Now, everybody? Go and get it quickly.
Yes.
Bye. Bye. Bye-bye.